I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway in Duluth, Minnesota, and saw the wide, muddy tire tracks cutting straight through my snow-covered lawn. My name is Brandon Sinclair, and I had just spent 3 weeks in Arizona taking care of my elderly father after his knee replacement surgery. The January cold hit me like a slap as I stepped out of my truck, but what made my blood freeze had nothing to do with the weather. My garage side door was hanging open, swinging slightly in the wind, and through the opening I could see that my brand new Ariens Deluxe 28-inch snowblower was gone. I stood there for a long moment, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air, trying to process what I was seeing. That machine had cost me $2,000 just last November. I had barely used it twice before leaving for Arizona. My neighbor, an older guy named Mr. Peterson, came out of his house when he saw me standing there. "Brandon, you are back," he said, pulling his coat tighter around himself. "Listen, I have been meaning to call you, but I did not have your number. That HOA president, Patricia Whitmore, she came by about a week ago with some guy in a maintenance truck. They went right into your garage and took your snowblower. I tried to tell them you were not home, but Patricia said something about HOA regulations and property maintenance violations." My jaw clenched. Patricia Whitmore had been a thorn in my side since I moved into Pinewood Heights 2 years ago. The woman was the textbook definition of a power-hungry HOA president. She was probably 50-something, with that particular haircut that seemed to be a requirement for her type, the kind that demands to speak to managers everywhere she goes. Every interaction I had ever had with her involved some petty complaint about my trash cans being visible from the street or my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall. "She took my snowblower," I asked, my voice tight with barely controlled anger, "from my locked garage." Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "Well, they broke the lock on your side door. I took some pictures on my phone if you need them. I figured you would want evidence when you got back. The whole thing seemed wrong to me, but you know how Patricia is. She acts like she owns the whole neighborhood." I thanked Mr. Peterson and asked him to email me those photos. Then I went inside my cold house to turn up the heat and figure out what the hell was going on. My hands were shaking, partly from cold and partly from rage, as I searched through the stack of mail that Mr. Peterson had been kind enough to collect for me. Sure enough, buried among the credit card offers and grocery store flyers, I found 3 notices from the Pinewood Heights HOA. The first notice, dated December 20th, informed me that my driveway and walkway had not been cleared within 24 hours of the December 18th snowfall, which violated HOA Covenant Section 12.3. The second notice, dated December 27th, stated that my continued violation of snow removal policies was creating a safety hazard, and that I was being fined $500. The third notice, dated January 2nd, declared that since I had not responded to previous warnings and had not remedied the situation, the HOA was exercising its right to enter my property to perform necessary maintenance, with all costs to be billed to me, plus an additional $1,000 fine for non-compliance. I read the notices 3 times, my disbelief growing with each read. I had called the HOA office before I left for Arizona. I had spoken to the secretary, a timid woman named Linda, and told her I would be gone for several weeks and that I had arranged for a snow removal service to handle my property. I had even paid the service, Quick Clear Snow Removal, $300 upfront for the entire time I would be away. I immediately called Quick Clear. The owner, a guy named Tom, answered on the 3rd ring. "Quick Clear, this is Tom." "Tom, this is Brandon Sinclair on Oakmont Drive in Pinewood Heights. I paid you to clear my driveway and walkway while I was out of town. I just got back and found HOA notices saying my property was not maintained. What happened?" There was a pause on the other end. "Mr. Sinclair, yeah, I remember. Look, we went to your house after the first snowfall on December 18th. We were literally in the process of clearing your driveway when this woman came out," said. She was the HOA president. "She told us we were not authorized to work in the neighborhood and that if we did not leave immediately, she would call the police and report us for trespassing. She was screaming at my crew, threatened to have our business license revoked. I tried to explain that you had hired us, but she would not listen. I still have the documentation that we attempted service." My grip on the phone tightened. "So Patricia Whitmore prevented you from doing the job I paid you for, then used that as justification to fine me and steal my equipment. I did not know she took your equipment, but yeah, that is basically what happened with us. I am sorry, man. I should have called you, but honestly, we deal with so many difficult HOAs that I just wrote it off. I can refund your money if you want." I told Tom I would get back to him and hung up. This was beyond petty HOA nonsense. This was theft, breaking and entering, and what sounded like a deliberate setup. I needed to see Patricia immediately. The Pinewood Heights HOA office was located in a small brick building near the neighborhood entrance. It was 4:30 in the afternoon when I pushed through the door, and Linda, the secretary, looked up with wide, nervous eyes. She recognized me immediately. "Mr. Sinclair, Patricia is in her office. Do you have an appointment?" "No, I do not have an appointment, Linda, but I need to speak with her right now." Linda picked up her phone with shaking hands, but before she could dial, Patricia's office door opened. Patricia Whitmore stood there in a cream-colored pantsuit, her blonde, highlighted hair styled in that aggressive bob, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "Mr. Sinclair, I heard you were back. I assume you received our notices regarding your multiple violations." I walked toward her, keeping my voice level despite the fury coursing through me. "I received notices about violations that only occurred because you personally prevented my hired snow removal service from doing their job. I also came home to find my garage broken into and my $2,000 snowblower missing. I want it back right now." Patricia's expression did not change. "Your snowblower was seized as per HOA Covenant Section 18.7, which allows the HOA to retain possession of equipment used to remedy violations until all associated fines and fees are paid in full. You currently owe this association $2,300. $50 for snow removal costs, $500 for your first violation fine, $1,000 for your second violation fine, $200 for emergency property access, and $550 in administrative fees. Once you pay that amount, you can reclaim your property." "You can't just steal people's property, Patricia. That is not how any of this works. I want my snowblower back today or I am calling the police." She actually smiled at that, a cold, thin smile. "Go ahead and call the police, Mr. Sinclair. The HOA covenants are legally binding documents that you signed when you purchased your home. We have every right to enforce them. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a meeting to attend." She started to close her office door, but I put my hand against it. "Where is my snowblower right now?" "That is HOA property until you satisfy your debt. Where we store it is not your concern." She pushed the door closed, and I heard the lock click. Linda would not meet my eyes when I turned around. I left the office and sat in my truck for a few minutes, trying to calm down enough to think clearly. I needed a lawyer. That much was obvious, but I also needed to find out where my snowblower actually was. If Patricia had damaged it or let someone else use it, That was additional theft and property damage. I spent the rest of the evening calling attorneys. Most of the offices were closed, but I left messages with 3 different law firms that specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. Then I did something I probably should have done first. I called the Duluth Police Department's non-emergency line. The officer who took my report was polite, but not particularly encouraging. "So your HOA took your snowblower as collateral for fines you owe them. Fines that only exist because the HOA president prevented my snow removal company from doing the work I paid them to do. She broke into my garage and stole my property. That is theft and breaking and entering." "Well, sir, if there is a contract dispute with your HOA, that is generally a civil matter. You would need to take it up in civil court. As for the breaking and entering, if they had what they believe to be authorization under the HOA covenants, it gets complicated. But I can send an officer by tomorrow to take a formal statement if you would like." I scheduled the appointment for the next morning, then called my insurance company to report the theft. That conversation went about as well as the one with the police. My homeowner's insurance agent explained that disputes with HOAs typically were not covered under standard theft provisions and that I should consult an attorney. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Patricia's smug expression, the casual way she had admitted to taking my property. Around midnight, I grabbed my laptop and started searching for everything I could find about Patricia Whitmore and the Pinewood Heights HOA. What I found was illuminating. The neighborhood's online community forum was full of complaints about Patricia. A couple on Maple Street had been fined $3,000 for painting their front door navy blue instead of the approved forest green. A single mother on Birch Lane was being threatened with a lien on her house because she had planted rose bushes that were supposedly not on the approved landscaping list. An elderly veteran had been cited for having an American flag that was 2 inches larger than the maximum allowed size. But what really caught my attention was a thread from 6 months ago. A guy named Robert Chen had posted that his riding lawn mower had been confiscated by the HOA for unpaid fines, and that when he finally paid the fines and got it back, the mower was destroyed. He had taken the HOA to small claims court and won a judgment, but according to his follow-up post, the HOA had appealed and tied the case up in legal proceedings. Robert said he had eventually given up because the legal fees were exceeding the cost of just buying a new mower. I sent Robert a private message through the forum, not expecting a response at that hour, but surprisingly he replied within 10 minutes. We exchanged phone numbers, and he called me right away. "Dude, I am telling you, Patricia Whitmore is running a scam," Robert said, his voice tight with frustration. "She did the same thing to me, fined me for stupid violations, then took my mower. When I finally got it back, the engine was seized, the blades were bent, and the whole thing smelled like someone had run it without oil. My mechanic said it had been used hard and put away without any maintenance. I am convinced Patricia or someone in the HOA was using it for their own properties." "Do you know where they keep confiscated equipment?" I asked. "No idea, man. They would not tell me that either, but here is something interesting. My neighbor saw my mower in Patricia's garage one time when her garage door was open. When I confronted her about it, she denied it completely and threatened to sue me for harassment. After I hung up with Robert, I knew what I had to do. I had to find out if my snowblower was at Patricia's house. If it was, and if it was damaged, I would have all the evidence I needed that this was not about HOA enforcement, but about personal use and possibly resale of confiscated equipment. The next morning, I met with Officer Jennings from the Duluth Police Department. He was a stocky guy in his 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. He took my statement, examined the photos Mr. Peterson had taken of Patricia, and the maintenance worker entering my garage and leaving with my snowblower, and looked over the HOA notices. "I have to be honest with you, Mr. Sinclair. This is messy. The HOA claims they had authorization under the covenants. You claim those covenants do not actually give them that right. That is going to be decided in civil court, not criminal court. However, if you can prove that the HOA president is using your property for personal use or has damaged it, that changes things. That would be conversion or possibly theft by deception. What if I can find out where my snowblower is and document its condition?" I asked. Officer Jennings gave me a long look. "If you happen to discover where your property is located, and you observe it from a public space or a space where you have permission to be, and you document what you see, that could be useful evidence. But do not trespass, do not break into anywhere, and do not take the law into your own hands. Understand?" I understood perfectly. That afternoon, I drove slowly through Pinewood Heights until I found Patricia Whitmore's house. It was on Sherwood Lane, a large 2-story colonial with a 3-car garage. The garage doors were all closed, and there was no way to see inside from the street. I parked a few houses down and watched for a while, trying to figure out my next move. That is when I got lucky. A postal worker pulled up in her truck to deliver mail to the house next to Patricia's. I waited until she finished and then approached her. "Excuse me, do you deliver to this neighborhood every day?" She nodded. "Monday through Saturday. Why?" "I am trying to find out if the HOA president in that house," I pointed to Patricia's place, "has been using equipment she confiscated from residents. Have you seen her with a large orange snowblower in the last week or so?" The postal worker, whose name tag read Carmen, raised her eyebrows. "Are you with the police or something?" "No, I am a resident. That is my snowblower she took from my property. I am just trying to get evidence before I take this to court." Carmen thought for a moment. "I am not supposed to get involved in this kind of thing, but I will tell you that I have seen that woman's husband using a big orange snowblower to clear their driveway after every storm. I noticed it because it looked brand new and expensive. This was maybe 3 or 4 times in the past week and a half." I thanked Carmen profusely and took down her contact information in case I needed her as a witness later. Now I knew my snowblower was almost certainly in Patricia's garage, and it was being used by her family. I needed to see it, though. I needed proof. For the next 2 days, I kept a loose watch on Patricia's house, trying not to be obvious about it. I learned that Patricia left for the HOA office every morning around 8 and came home around 5:30. Her husband, a balding man in his 50s who drove a BMW, left around 7 and returned around 6. On the 3rd day, January 12th, we got another snowstorm. 6 inches fell overnight, and I watched from my truck, parked 3 streets over, as Patricia's husband opened their garage at 6:30 in the morning. I had borrowed a good camera with a zoom lens from Mr. Peterson, who turned out to be an amateur wildlife photographer. Through the lens, I could clearly see my Ariane snowblower sitting in Patricia's garage, and I could see something else too. The machine's auger housing was bent, one of the skid shoes was missing, and there was a large dent in the side panel. My nearly new snowblower had been wrecked. I took as many photos as I could, including clear shots of the serial number on the machine, which I had documentation for from my purchase. Patricia's husband pulled the damaged snowblower out and started it up. Even from a distance, I could hear that the engine was not running right. It sputtered and smoked, and the man had to fiddle with it for several minutes before he could get it to run smoothly enough to start clearing the driveway. As I watched this guy use my wrecked snowblower to clear his own driveway, something inside me snapped. I had been patient. I had tried to do things the right way. But this was not just an HOA overstepping its bounds. This was outright theft and destruction of property. Patricia had deliberately created a situation where she could steal my equipment, and then she or her family had destroyed it through misuse. I drove straight to the police station and asked to speak with Officer Jennings. When he came out to meet me, I showed him the photos on the camera. That is my snowblower in Patricia Whitmore's garage. You can see the serial number here matches my purchase documentation. You can also see that it has been badly damaged. That postal worker I talked to will testify that she has seen Patricia's husband using it multiple times. This is not HOA enforcement. This is theft. Officer Jennings studied the photos carefully. Okay, this is good. This is evidence of conversion at minimum. Let me talk to my sergeant and the DA's office. The fact that the property is in her personal garage and being used by her family, not stored in some HOA facility, that changes the legal picture significantly. 3 hours later, I got a call from Officer Jennings asking me to come back to the station. When I arrived, there were 2 other officers and a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Assistant District Attorney Melissa Flores. Mr. Sinclair, I have reviewed your complaint and the evidence you have provided. I believe we have grounds for a search warrant based on probable cause that stolen property is being kept at Patricia Whitmore's residence. However, I want to make sure we have all our ducks in a row because HOA cases can be legally complex. Do you have the original purchase receipt for the snowblower? I pulled out my phone and showed her the email receipt from Northern Tool and Equipment, dated November 3rd of the previous year. Purchase price $2,047, including tax. Serial number matching the one in the photos. And you have documentation that you hired a snow removal service. I showed her the contract and payment confirmation from Quick Clear, along with the written statement Tom had emailed me about Patricia threatening his crew. And you informed the HOA that you would be out of town and had arranged for service. This was the one weak point. I had called and spoken to Linda, but I had not sent anything in writing. However, Mr. Peterson had helped me out there too. He had given me a signed statement that he had heard me tell Patricia myself at a neighborhood gathering in early December that I would be going to Arizona and had arranged for snow removal. 3 other neighbors had signed similar statements after I talked to them. Ada Flores nodded, satisfied. Okay, we will get the warrant. This should happen quickly, possibly as early as tomorrow. Be available because I may need you to formally identify the property. That night, I barely slept again, but this time it was from anticipation rather than anger. The next morning, January 13th, Officer Jennings called me at 9 o'clock. We executed the search warrant an hour ago. Your snowblower is in Patricia Whitmore's garage, and it is in bad shape. We need you to come down and formally identify it and document the damage. I was there in 15 minutes. Patricia's house was a scene of activity, with 2 police cars parked in front and neighbors standing on their lawns watching. Patricia herself was standing on her front porch, her face red with fury, arguing with Ada Flores. This is outrageous. That equipment was legally confiscated by the HOA. You have no right to search my home, Mrs. Whitmore. The search warrant was properly obtained and executed. HOA property would be stored in an HOA facility, not in your personal garage for your personal use. You need to stop talking now and contact an attorney. I walked past Patricia into the garage. My snowblower sat there, and seeing it up close made my stomach turn. The auger housing was not just bent, it was cracked. One of the wheels was damaged. The engine cover had a hole in it, like someone had hit a rock or a piece of metal. The control panel was shattered. This machine that had been pristine when I left for Arizona was now practically totaled. "Can you confirm this is your property?" Officer Jennings asked. "Yes." "Serial number matches, and I can show you specific marks. See this small scratch on the handle? I did that when I was assembling it and the screwdriver slipped. And there is a mark on the side panel here that looks like a paint drip from my garage wall. That was there before, but now it is surrounded by all this new damage." A police photographer documented everything while I went through a detailed list of the damage with Officer Jennings. The officer estimated the repair cost would likely exceed the value of the machine, making it a total loss. "We are seizing this as evidence," Officer Jennings said. "Once the case is resolved, it will be returned to you, but given its condition, you will probably want to file an insurance claim or seek restitution." "What happens to Patricia now?" I asked. "She is being arrested for theft and criminal conversion. Given the value of the property and the circumstances, these are felony charges. She will be booked, arraigned, and she can post bail. The criminal case will proceed from there, but you will also want to file a civil suit for damages." I watched as Patricia was led to a police car in handcuffs, still protesting loudly that she had done nothing wrong and that this was a legal HOA action. Her husband stood in the doorway, looking shell-shocked. Neighbors were filming on their phones, and I knew this would be all over the community forum within the hour. Ada Flores approached me as I was leaving. "Mr. Sinclair, I want you to be prepared for this to take some time. Patricia Whitmore will likely argue that she believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. We will have to prove that she acted with criminal intent. The fact that the property was in her personal possession and being used by her family is strong evidence, but her attorney will try to muddy the waters. What about all the other people she has done this to? Robert Chen and others. If we can establish a pattern of behavior, that would strengthen the case significantly. I would encourage anyone who has had similar experiences with Mrs. Whitmore to come forward and file reports." That is exactly what happened. Over the next week, 7 other residents of Pinewood Heights came forward with complaints about Patricia. Robert Chen filed a new police report about his destroyed lawn mower. A woman named Susan had lost a pressure washer. A man named David had had his hedge trimmers confiscated and returned broken. In each case, the pattern was the same: questionable fines, confiscated equipment, and property returned damaged or not returned at all. The HOA itself went into crisis mode. An emergency meeting was called, and the board, which had basically been rubber stamping whatever Patricia wanted for years, suddenly found their spines. Patricia was removed as president and banned from holding any HOA position. Linda, the timid secretary, stepped forward and revealed that Patricia had been keeping 2 sets of books, one official set and another that showed she had been charging inflated fees for administrative costs and pocketing the difference. That opened up a whole new investigation into embezzlement. I hired an attorney named Margaret Brennan, a sharp woman in her 60s who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. She filed a civil lawsuit against both Patricia personally and the HOA as an organization for theft, conversion, trespassing, and damages. She also helped me file a complaint with the Minnesota Attorney General's office regarding the HOA's practices. The criminal case moved faster than I expected. Patricia's attorney tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that she had been acting in her capacity as HOA president and therefore had immunity for actions taken in that role. The judge was not buying it. The HOA covenants do not provide for the confiscation and personal use of residents' property, Judge Martin said at the hearing I attended in February. Even if they did, storing confiscated property in one's personal garage and allowing family members to use it clearly exceeds any reasonable interpretation of HOA authority. The defendant's motion to dismiss is denied. Patricia's preliminary hearing was in late March. I testified about coming home to find my garage broken into and my snowblower gone. Tom from Quick Clear testified about Patricia threatening his crew and preventing them from doing the work I had paid for. Carmen, the postal worker, testified about seeing Patricia's husband repeatedly using my orange Aryan snowblower. Mr. Peterson testified about witnessing Patricia and a maintenance worker taking the machine from my garage. The most damaging testimony came from Linda, the former HOA secretary. She had been granted immunity in exchange for cooperating with prosecutors. She testified that Patricia had told her explicitly not to log my phone call about being out of town and hiring a snow removal service. She also testified that Patricia had said, "If that jerk Sinclair is not going to be around to use his fancy snowblower, we might as well get some use out of it." That statement, combined with all the other evidence, made it clear that this had been premeditated theft, not an overzealous interpretation of HOA rules. Patricia was bound over for trial on felony theft and criminal conversion charges. The embezzlement charges came later, after a forensic accountant went through the HOA books and found that Patricia had stolen over $40,000 from the association over a 5-year period through inflated fees, fake vendor invoices, and kickback schemes. The civil case settled before trial. The HOA's insurance company, desperate to avoid the publicity of a trial and the exposure of more potential plaintiffs, offered me $25,000 to cover the destroyed snowblower, the damage to my garage, legal fees, and compensation for the stress and hassle. Margaret advised me to take it, and I did. Robert Chen and the other victims negotiated their own settlements. Patricia's criminal trial was in June. I attended every day, watching as the prosecution methodically laid out the case. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. In August, Patricia was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the theft charges and an additional 5 years for the embezzlement, with the sentences to run concurrently. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to the individual victims, though her attorney indicated she would appeal. Her husband filed for divorce shortly after the sentencing. The HOA itself underwent major reforms. The board was completely replaced through a special election. The new board hired a professional management company to oversee operations and implemented strict policies about fines, due process, and property access. They also amended the covenants to make them less draconian and to provide clear limits on enforcement actions. I was asked to join the board, but I politely declined. I had had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. By September, life in Pinewood Heights had mostly returned to normal. The neighborhood was actually more pleasant without Patricia's reign of terror. People were not afraid to plant flowers or paint their doors anymore. The new HOA board focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. I used some of the settlement money to buy a new snowblower, a top-of-the-line model with tracks instead of wheels and a heated hand grip system. I also installed a serious security system in my garage with cameras and alarms, and I reinforced the side door with a steel security door that would require power tools to breach. In October, I got a call from Margaret Brennan. Patricia's appeal had been denied, and she had entered the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee to begin serving her sentence. The restitution payments would come from the sale of Patricia's house and her other assets. I would eventually receive about $18,000 on top of the settlement I had already gotten, though it would probably take a year or more for all the assets to be liquidated. You know, Brandon, this case has had some interesting ripple effects, Margaret told me. The Attorney General's office is now looking into HOA practices statewide. They are considering new regulations to prevent this kind of abuse. Your case might actually result in better protections for homeowners across Minnesota. That was satisfying to hear. What had started as a personal nightmare had turned into something that might help other people avoid the same situation. In November, almost a year after I had left for Arizona, I was clearing my driveway with my new snowblower when Mr. Peterson came over. He was bundled up against the cold, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. You know, Brandon, I have lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. Patricia made everyone miserable for at least the last 10. I cannot tell you how happy people are that she is gone. You did everyone a favor by standing up to her. I just wanted my snowblower back, I said with a laugh. Yeah, but a lot of people would have just paid the fines and let it go. You fighting back, getting the police involved, exposing all the corruption that took guts. The neighborhood is better for it. We talked for a while longer, and Mr. Peterson invited me to a block party the new HOA board was planning for the spring. It would be the first real community event Pinewood Heights had had in years, something focused on bringing people together rather than enforcing rules. As I finished clearing my driveway and put my snowblower safely back in my locked, alarmed garage, I thought about everything that had happened. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. There had been moments when I wondered if I should just pay Patricia's extortionate fines and move on with my life. But standing up to bullies, whether they are schoolyard thugs or HOA presidents drunk on petty power, is always worth it in the end. The legal system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. Patricia was in prison where she belonged. The HOA had been reformed. The neighborhood was healing. And I had my compensation, my new snowblower, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. I went inside, made myself a cup of hot chocolate, and sat by the window watching the snow fall. My phone buzzed with a notification from the Pinewood Heights Community Forum. Someone had posted a photo from 5 years ago, a neighborhood gathering where Patricia stood in the center, holding a gavel, a self-satisfied smile on her face. The caption read, "Remember when we thought we had to put up with this? Thanks to Brandon Sinclair for showing us we didn't." The post had dozens of likes and comments, people sharing their own stories of Patricia's tyranny and expressing relief that those days were over. I did not respond to the post. I had never wanted to be a neighborhood hero or a symbol of resistance. I just wanted to live in peace, keep my property, and not be harassed by someone on a power trip. But if my experience helped other people realize they did not have to tolerate abuse from HOAs or anyone else in a position of petty authority, then maybe the whole nightmare had been worth it. The snow continued to fall outside, thick and heavy, the kind of snow that would require clearing in the morning. I smiled, thinking about my new snowblower waiting in the garage, secure and ready to use. This time, there would be no Patricia Whitmore to steal it, no bogus fines, no manufactured violations. Just a homeowner taking care of his property in peace. I heard the snowplow rumble past outside, the scrape of its blade against the pavement a familiar winter sound. My phone rang, and I saw it was my father calling from Arizona. "Hey, Dad, how is the knee doing?" "Much better. Thanks to you coming out here to help. Listen, I was talking to some of my neighbors in the retirement community down here, and you would not believe the HOA problems they are having. I told them about what happened to you and how you fought back. Would you be willing to talk to a few of them, maybe give them some advice? I laughed. Dad, I am not an expert on HOA law. I just documented everything and got a good attorney. That is exactly the advice they need. These HOAs think they can push people around because most folks do not know their rights or do not want to fight. You proved it can be done. I agreed to talk to his neighbors, and after we hung up, I found myself thinking about that. Maybe there was something larger I could do with this experience. I was not a lawyer or an activist, but I had learned a lot about HOA law, about documentation, about standing up to institutional bullies. Maybe I could help other people navigate similar situations. The next morning, I shoveled my walkway and cleared my driveway with my new snowblower. The machine performed perfectly, cutting through the heavy snow with ease. Several neighbors waved as they did their own snow removal, and Mrs. Kowalski from across the street called out, "Beautiful machine, Brandon. Bet you are keeping that one locked up tight." "You know it," I called back. Later that day, I received an email from a reporter at the Duluth News-Tribune. They were doing a story on HOA abuse and reform in Minnesota and wanted to interview me. I agreed, figuring that more publicity about the issue could only help other homeowners avoid what I had gone through. The article ran in early December, a full-page feature with the headline "How One Homeowner's Fight Against HOA Tyranny Led to Statewide Reform." They had interviewed me, Margaret Brennan, Ada Flores, and several other Pinewood Heights residents. The story detailed Patricia's crimes, the court case, and the broader issue of HOA overreach. It also mentioned the new regulations the Attorney General's office was proposing, which would require HOAs to follow strict due process procedures before imposing fines, prohibit the confiscation of personal property except in extreme circumstances with court approval, and mandate annual independent audits of HOA finances. The article generated significant discussion. I received emails from homeowners across Minnesota and even from other states, people dealing with their own HOA nightmares. I responded to as many as I could, offering advice about documentation, legal resources, and the importance of standing up for your rights. One email particularly stood out. It was from a young couple in Bloomington, who were being fined by their HOA for having a vegetable garden in their backyard, something the HOA claimed violated aesthetic standards, even though the garden was not visible from the street. They had already paid over $1,000 in fines and were facing a lien on their house. I connected them with Margaret Brennan, who took their case pro bono. Last I heard, they were suing the HOA and expected to win. By the time the first anniversary of my return from Arizona rolled around in January of the following year, my life had settled into a comfortable routine. The settlement money had been fully paid out, and I had used some of it to take a nice vacation to Florida. The new HOA board was functioning well, focusing on maintaining common areas and organizing community events rather than harassing residents. Patricia remained in prison, serving her sentence with no chance of early release given the severity of her crimes and her lack of remorse. I had also started dating someone, a woman named Rebecca Ellis, who worked as an accountant and had her own condo in a neighborhood with no HOA, which she joked was her #1 criterion for buying property. We had met at a community meeting about the proposed HOA reforms, where she had been representing a client who was fighting his HOA. We bonded over our shared frustration with petty bureaucratic tyranny, and things had developed from there. One evening in late January, Rebecca and I were having dinner at my house when she asked, "Do you ever regret buying a house in an HOA neighborhood? I mean, after everything you went through?" I thought about it for a moment. Sometimes. But honestly, most HOAs are not as bad as Patricia made ours. The problem was not the concept of an HOA. It was that one person with too much power and no accountability. Now that the neighborhood has reformed and put real oversight in place, it is actually pretty nice here. The common areas are well maintained, the streets get plowed quickly, and people generally get along. But if you could go back and choose again, knowing what you know now, I would still buy the house. It is a great house in a good location. But I would have paid more attention to the HOA documents and the board composition. I would have gone to meetings from the start instead of ignoring the HOA until it became a problem. And I definitely would have documented every interaction in writing instead of relying on phone calls. Rebecca nodded. That is good advice for anyone buying a house. Read the covenants, attend the meetings, create a paper trail for everything. And do not be afraid to push back when something is wrong. That is the biggest lesson. People like Patricia count on others being too intimidated or too busy to fight back. The moment you show you are willing to stand up for yourself, document everything, and involve authorities when necessary, the whole power dynamic shifts. In March, I was invited to speak at a community forum on HOA reform that the Attorney General's office was hosting in St. Paul. I drove down with Rebecca and found myself in a room with about 200 people, all with their own HOA horror stories. I spoke for 15 minutes about my experience, emphasizing the importance of documentation, knowing your rights, and not being afraid to escalate to law enforcement when HOA actions cross the line into criminal behavior. The response was overwhelming. During the Q&A session, person after person stood up to share similar stories of HOA abuse, and many thanked me for speaking out. A state legislator who was in attendance announced that she was introducing a bill that would create a state-level HOA ombudsman office to investigate complaints and mediate disputes, with the power to impose penalties on HOAs that violated homeowner rights. After the forum, a man in his 70s approached me. His name was George, and he had tears in his eyes. My HOA has been trying to foreclose on my house because I owe them $8,000 in fines for having the wrong color mailbox. I have lived in that house for 30 years. I am on a fixed income and I cannot afford a lawyer, but hearing you talk about fighting back and winning, it gives me hope. Can you tell me where to start? I spent half an hour with George, giving him contact information for legal aid organizations, explaining how to file complaints with the Attorney General's office, and walking him through the process of documenting his interactions with the HOA. Later, I connected him with Margaret Brennan, who agreed to consult with him for free. The bill the state legislator had mentioned passed the following year, with strong bipartisan support. The HOA Homeowner Protection Act created real oversight and accountability for HOAs across Minnesota, making it much harder for people like Patricia Whitmore to abuse their positions. I was invited to the bill signing ceremony, and the governor mentioned my case specifically as an example of why the legislation was necessary. Standing in the state capitol, watching the governor sign a law that would protect thousands of homeowners from the kind of abuse I had experienced, I felt a sense of closure. What had started as a personal violation, coming home to find my garage broken into and my snowblower stolen, had turned into something much larger. It had exposed corruption, led to criminal convictions, and ultimately resulted in systemic reform. That night, Rebecca and I celebrated with dinner at a nice restaurant in downtown St. Paul. As we drove back to Duluth, the conversation turned to the future. "You know, you have become kind of a public figure through all this," Rebecca said. "Have you thought about doing more advocacy work? Maybe working with homeowner rights organizations." "I have thought about it," I admitted. "But I am not sure I want that to be my whole identity. I fought Patricia because she stole my property and I wanted justice. I spoke out because I hoped it would help other people. But at the end of the day, I just want to live my life, do my job, and enjoy my home without constant drama." "That is fair. You have already done more than most people would. You took on a fight that a lot of people would have walked away from, and you made a real difference." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, and I thought about everything that had happened over the past 2 years. If someone had told me when I bought my house in Pinewood Heights that I would end up in a legal battle with my HOA that would lead to criminal charges, prison time for the HOA president, a statewide reform movement, and me speaking at the state capitol, I would have thought they were crazy. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Sometimes those turns are negative, like coming home to find your property stolen and your garage broken into. But sometimes, if you are willing to stand up for yourself and fight for what is right, those negative experiences can lead to positive changes that extend far beyond your own situation. By the time spring arrived, the story of Patricia Whitmore and the Pinewood Heights HOA had mostly faded from the news cycle. There were new scandals and new stories to capture public attention, but the impact of what had happened continued to ripple outward. The reforms that had been implemented in Minnesota inspired similar legislation in other states. HOAs across the country became more cautious about overstepping their authority, knowing that homeowners were increasingly willing to fight back, and that the legal system was beginning to take HOA abuse more seriously. As for me, I settled back into a quiet life. I went to work, spent time with Rebecca, maintained my house, and yes, cleared my driveway with my new snowblower whenever it snowed. I attended HOA meetings occasionally, just to stay informed and to make sure the new board was staying on track. The neighborhood had truly transformed. People were friendlier, more engaged, and less fearful. The block party that had been planned finally happened in May, and it was a huge success, with families from across the neighborhood gathering in the common area for food, games, and music. Mr. Peterson, who had been so helpful with his photographs and testimony, became a good friend. We had coffee every couple of weeks, and he loved to tell the story of how I had taken down Patricia Whitmore to anyone who would listen. He embellished it more each time, but I did not mind. The old man was enjoying his newfound role as a neighborhood historian. One afternoon in June, I was mowing my lawn when a car I did not recognize pulled into my driveway. A young woman got out, probably in her mid-20s, looking nervous. "Are you Brandon Sinclair?" she asked. "I am." "Can I help you?" "My name is Jennifer. Patricia Whitmore is my mother. I wanted to talk to you if you have a few minutes." I turned off the lawn mower and invited her to sit on the porch. I got us both glasses of water and we sat in the shade while she gathered her thoughts. "I just want you to know that I believe you," Jennifer said. "About what my mother did. I have known for a long time that she had serious control issues and that she got off on having power over people. I tried to talk to her about it years ago, but she would not listen. When she got elected HOA president, I knew it would be bad, but I never imagined she would go this far." "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "It must be difficult having your mother in prison." "It is, but honestly, she brought it on herself. She is not a victim here. You and the other people she stole from and harassed, you are the victims. I came here to apologize on behalf of my family for what she did. My father is devastated and feels terrible that he did not realize what was happening. He thought he was just borrowing an HOA-owned snowblower to help clear the driveway. He had no idea it was stolen property. We talked for about half an hour. Jennifer told me that she had cut off contact with her mother after Patricia refused to take responsibility for her actions and continued to insist that she had been unfairly persecuted. Jennifer's younger brother had done the same. Patricia's husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, visited her in prison occasionally but was moving on with his life. "I hope you can rebuild your life," I told Jennifer as she was leaving. "None of this was your fault. You should not carry guilt for your mother's choices." She thanked me with tears in her eyes and drove away. After she left, I sat on the porch for a while, processing the conversation. It was a reminder that Patricia's actions had hurt more than just the homeowners she had targeted. They had destroyed her own family and her own life. Later that evening, I told Rebecca about Jennifer's visit. "That must have been surreal," Rebecca said. "It was. But it was also good in a way. It humanized the whole situation. Patricia is not just some villain in a story. She is a real person who made terrible choices and is now paying the consequences. And those consequences extend to people who did not deserve it, like her kids." "Do you forgive her?" Rebecca asked. I thought about that. I do not know if forgive is the right word. I am not angry anymore. The legal system worked. I got justice and compensation, and the neighborhood is better now. But what she did was criminal, and she deserved to go to prison for it. I guess I accept that it happened, that it is over, and that I can move on. Maybe that is close enough to forgiveness. As summer turned to fall and then to winter again, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed. 2 years earlier, I had been a fairly passive homeowner, someone who paid his dues and followed the rules and assumed that if he minded his own business, everything would be fine. Now, I was someone who understood that sometimes you have to stand up and fight, that justice does not happen automatically, and that regular people can take on seemingly powerful institutions and win. The story of my stolen snowblower had become a kind of legend in certain circles. Whenever discussions about HOA reform came up online or in community meetings, someone would inevitably mention the Pinewood Heights case. I had become, somewhat against my will, a minor symbol of homeowner resistance to HOA tyranny. But symbols are just symbols. The reality was much more mundane. I was just a guy who wanted his property back and was willing to do what it took to get it. The fact that my case had larger implications and helped spark reform was gratifying, but it was not why I had fought. I fought because what Patricia did was wrong, and nobody should be able to get away with that kind of behavior. In December, I received a letter from the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Patricia Whitmore had filed a request for early release based on good behavior and completion of various programs. As a victim in her case, I had the right to submit a statement supporting or opposing the request. The hearing would be in February. I discussed it with Margaret Brennan, who advised me that early release was unlikely given that Patricia had only served about 1.5 years of her sentence and had not yet paid full restitution to all her victims. Still, I decided to submit a statement opposing early release. I kept it factual and unemotional, laying out the facts of what Patricia had done, the impact it had on me and other victims, and my belief that she needed to serve her full sentence as a matter of justice and deterrence. The parole board denied Patricia's request. She would remain in prison for at least another year before she could reapply. Life moved on. Rebecca and I got engaged that Christmas, and we started planning a wedding for the following summer. We talked about where we would live after getting married. Her condo was smaller than my house, but it was in a great location downtown. My house was larger and had a yard, but it was in an HOA neighborhood, which gave Rebecca understandable pause. The HOA is fine now, I assured her. Completely reformed, professional management, reasonable people on the board. It is nothing like it was under Patricia. I know, but still. After everything you went through, do you really want to stay here? Do not we deserve a fresh start somewhere without all those memories? She had a point. As much as I loved my house, and as much as the neighborhood had improved, there was something appealing about starting our married life somewhere new, somewhere without the baggage of the past few years. We decided to sell my house and buy something together in a neighborhood with no HOA. It took a few months to find the right place, but eventually we settled on a beautiful craftsman-style house in a quiet neighborhood in the woodland area of Duluth. No HOA, no covenants, just a friendly neighborhood with decent people who respected each other's property and privacy. The closing on my old house was in May. The buyers were a young couple with a baby, first-time homeowners excited about the space and the neighborhood. I told them about the HOA situation, not to scare them but to inform them. They appreciated the honesty and said they had done their research and felt comfortable with the new HOA leadership. As I handed over the keys and drove away from Pinewood Heights for the last time as a resident, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Nostalgia for the good times I had had there before all the drama. Pride in having stood up to corruption and helped make things better, and hope for the future with Rebecca in our new home. Our wedding was in July, a small ceremony with close friends and family in Rebecca's parents' backyard, overlooking Lake Superior. Mr. Peterson came, as did several of my former neighbors from Pinewood Heights. Even Officer Jennings and Ada Flores attended, having become friends through the whole ordeal. Margaret Brennan gave a toast that brought the house down, joking that she had never had a client whose case led to statewide legislative reform, and that she was still waiting for me to pay her bonus for all the publicity. During the reception, Mr. Peterson pulled me aside. "You know, Brandon, I have been thinking about writing a book about the whole Patricia Whitmore situation. Would you be interested in collaborating?" I laughed. "I think I have told that story enough times, Mr. Peterson, but if you want to write it, you have my blessing. Just change the names to protect the innocent. And the guilty," he added with a wink. As Rebecca and I danced at our wedding, surrounded by people we loved, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. If Patricia had not stolen my snowblower, I might never have learned to stand up for myself the way I did. I might never have gotten involved in advocacy and reform. I might never have met Rebecca at that community meeting. I am not saying I am grateful to Patricia for what she did. She was a criminal who hurt a lot of people and deserved every bit of punishment she received. But I am grateful for what I learned from the experience. I learned that the system can work if you are persistent and document everything. I learned that standing up to bullies, even institutional ones, is possible. I learned that one person can make a difference, that corruption can be exposed, and that justice, while slow, can prevail. Most of all, I learned that your home is worth fighting for. Not just the physical structure, but your right to live in peace, to be treated fairly, and to not be victimized by people who abuse their authority. That is a lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my life. As the sun set over Lake Superior and the party continued into the evening, I felt genuinely happy. The nightmare of coming home to find my garage broken into and my snowblower stolen was firmly in the past. The future stretched out ahead, full of possibility and promise. And if I ever had to deal with another HOA, well, I knew exactly what to do.